Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV, where I'm privileged to be joined today by legendary Doctor Who script editor and author Eric Saward, the great Mark Gatiss, the one and only James Goss, author Joy Wilkinson, who has always worked on Doctor Who, Gary Russell, who has worked as a script editor on Doctor Who, and the writer of my all-time favourite Doctor Who episode, Robert Shearman. Thank you for joining us today. We're talking about something truly exciting, which is the latest brace of Target Doctor Who paperback releases. What was your first experience of Doctor Who personally?
Oh God! As a kid, I've got two much older brothers than me. They would have watched Doctor Who, and I would have been sat between them, sort of forced to watch Doctor Who, really. And I was the one it stuck with. They kind of moved off very quickly to more sensible things, and I became an absolute addict. My first memory of Doctor Who, my first clear memory of Doctor Who, is the change from William Hartnell into Patrick Troughton. I remember that vividly. Okay. At the time, I thought it was three old age pensioners, one of whom looked just like my grandma, who had fallen on the floor, and the other two old age pensioners were trying to get them back up. That's how I remember it.
It's Spearhead from Space, Jon Pertwee's first story. That's what I remember very, very vividly. Sitting, 2 foot away from the telly, and the Autons coming through the shop window, not quite the way you remember. My family used to do impersonations of the fish people from the Underwater Menace because they found them so funny. I remember that being very current. I can see my mum now kind of doing that. And I think somewhere from being like 3 or something, I remember when the Radio Times 10th anniversary special came out, the best day there's ever been in history. Yeah. And I remember seeing a photo. I
remember that so clearly myself. It was amazing.
I remember seeing a photograph of the white robots from the Mind Robber, and I can remember thinking I'd seen them. So there's a possibility, because you forget all those things when you're that age, but I might have seen it before Jon Pertwee, but that's definitely my first proper memory.
Oh gosh, my first experience was Tom Baker, right towards the end of his tenure, and an episode called Full Circle, which was absolutely terrifying at that age, and it had kind of spiders hatching out of watermelons and biting Romana and making her do their bidding, and these hideous marshmen coming out of the waters, and that just gave me nightmares for years to come. So classic Doctor Who, basically.
Who was your favourite Doctor and why?
I think I first became massively engaged with the show, the Peter Davison era.
Yeah,
because you have to remember it was very exciting, and all the kids would still play Doctor Who in the playground because it was on twice a week, which is an extraordinary thing, and it was on an awful lot of the year, and it was terribly fun and all-consuming.
Yeah, I get a tremendous feeling of nostalgic warmth with Davison. He's also a really brilliant actor.
Yes,
and I think it's between him and Troughton. Patrick Troughton, I think, is another Doctor that, whenever I watch Patrick Troughton, I'm always amazed, even with maybe not always very good scripts at times, just how hard he's working to be interesting. And I mean, Tom Baker does a very, very similar thing. You can always sense that Tom Baker is sometimes frustrated, but he's never not going to be the Doctor. I mean, that's what actually they all basically do that. But I think that I get my nostalgic kick from Davis mostly.
What was the genesis of your two Dalek adventures, Resurrection and Revelation? How did they both come to be? At different times, of course, in the show's history.
The Resurrection. I can't remember. I was trying to think of this afternoon that how that came about. Revelation came about because I reread Evelyn Waugh's The Loved One, which is a book, very funny book about funerary business in America back in the 50s, I think it was, and extremes they went to, and I read it and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thought perhaps I could do something around something like this. And whereas I used the book as an inspiration, I obviously didn't lift anything out of it. But yes, that's how rereading the book set in motion Revelation of the Daleks.
Now, I take it that you were a fan of the Target books from some time ago, right?
Addicted, absolutely addicted. I walked into Woolworths in Maidenhead High Street one afternoon, one Saturday, and there, staring at me on a little book plinth, was Doctor Who and the Day of the Daleks and Doctor Who and the Doomsday Weapon.
Yeah.
And I was torn. It was like, oh, I have to have this. Because prior to that, the only thing we'd ever had was annuals once a year. So suddenly there was a book, and I didn't know what the Doomsday Weapon was. I didn't remember that name because, of course, it didn't go out like that on TV, and the cover didn't really say anything to me. So Day of the Daleks, I knew, I loved, I remembered watching, boom, bought that.
When I was a kid, it was this mad thing of being on holiday in Porlock Weir and going down to the little shop on Porlock Weir Harbour and suddenly discovering amongst the postcards on one of those whirling dervish things that
the spinner racks, yeah.
Yep. And there was a Doctor Who book, and I could not quite understand this because it said it was Doctor Who and the Visitation, and I was so terribly excited. And I took it home and I read it a dozen times. And I know that seems like, an exaggeration, but that was, I read it a dozen times, and then I went back because I was like, well, there was one Doctor Who book, maybe there's another Doctor Who book. And then I discovered there was Doctor Who and the Monster of Peladon. And I'd only seen Doctor Who and the Curse of Peladon on TV, and the idea that there was a sequel. So then that got read another dozen times.
The first Target I got was the Three Doctors.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic.
What I can remember so vividly, I bought it from Strike's Garden Centre in Darlington, and there was a wall of them. It was like a section, and I chose the Three Doctors. It seemed the logical one to start with. And while my parents went around the garden centre, I sat in the back of the car, and I think I read the whole thing actually before they came back. And then Doctor Who and the Daleks. And then it just went from there. But I decided to start with that because obviously I remembered the story. It was very recent, and also it had Three Doctors, and it was an amazing cover, and everything go for it. It's still such a special story to me. That really is so special.
So you clearly were a fan, became a fan of the Target books. Did you have any of the particular favourites, or have there ever been one that you wanted but you don't have?
I found the 10 Sticks ones the easiest, but the ones I sort of began to really fall in love with were the Malcolm Hulke ones. So Cave Monsters was a massive influence, just because I love the fact that characters seem to be you'd be given, they weren't called backstories because you didn't think of it in those terms, but the way in which he would just very, very subtly give so much depth to characters who would then be killed by a Silurian really affected me, actually, in the way that also that he had the bravery, I realized later on, to change the story to get a different emotional impact because it's now prose rather than television. Yeah. was really impressive.
Now, you've written a number of Target adaptations, both of stories you wrote and stories you script edited, and I think almost certainly as script editor contributed a lot more to the story than perhaps you were given credit for at the time. So my assumption was, by the way, that that's why you ended up writing those novelizations. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, Twin Dilemma was a bit of a disaster as a television show, but I felt there was a lot of potential there. It wasn't funny enough, and it wasn't odd enough, I felt. And I thought, well, if the author is happy for me to do the adaptation, then I think I'll have a go. And what came out was slightly odd, but it was nearer to the thing that it should have been on television.
Now your novel is The Witchfinders. So yes. Could you tell me of the genesis of that story in the first place?
Yeah. So when we were in the run up to Jodie's first season, we did writers' rooms where there were lots of us and all just pitching lots of ideas. We'd kind of come along for a week and we'd have a different setting or a different character or a different alien, and right at that very beginning, I had this idea for a story to do with Pendle Hill, because that's the area that I come from, and to do with mud monsters. I think I used the line, Pendle Hill rises up into an army of mud monsters, and Chris was like, make a note of that one.
Yeah.
So that was there right from the beginning. And then when he decided which episodes he wanted for that series, that was on his wish list. And I you know, there was I was very possessive of it, and I was like, that's my story, I've got to do that one.
Well, Albert De Petrillo at BBC Books asked me a good while ago, I mean about 4 or 5 years ago, before the targets were conceived, about doing it as a one-off. I'm not quite sure why, but I didn't have time. I thought I'd love to, but then actually when the whole range sort of restarted, he asked again, and I said, well, and it was just perfect timing, really. And so that's the one we went for. I mean, it's one of my favorites, and I really enjoyed it.
We'll race through this quickly. Basically, in 2016, I wrote this, which is based on Douglas's first draft delivered to the BBC, which is a whacking 403-page monster, because Douglas's first scripts were very, very long and full of ideas that the BBC couldn't possibly use. The target novelization is, it's 183 pages, so it's not quite as short. But you know, this is coming in at between 20 and 30,000 words. This is about 96,000 words, which sounds a bit self-indulgent, but there was an awful lot of unused Douglas Adams material to try and fit in. But because this was based on the original scripts, rather than what was televised, when it came to doing the adaptation, I thought, well, it's really easy. I'll just leave out all the scenes that aren't on TV. And it actually turned out to be much more complicated, because even the scenes that were used were written completely differently. And when I was doing the original version of the book, I obviously favored unused material rather than used material, so that people go, oh, I've never seen that joke before. As a Doctor Who fan, I now own this joke.
What worried me about doing Dalek, I mean, looking back at the old 4-parters that Terence Dix used to do, I mean, there's enough story in there, enough change of location that you feel it could be a novel. I think what I worried about with Dalek when I looked at it was that it's 45 minutes, it's quite fast paced, it's very claustrophobic in terms of location, but also in terms of time. I mean, once it starts, it could be in real time, more or less. And that isn't very novelistic, that's like a short story. So I worried that the story is basically people just running up some stairs for 40 minutes. That's hard to pull off.
So obviously we all knew the TV movie was happening, and it was always assumed somewhere that there would probably be a novelization of it, because there'd been novelizations of everything up to that point. But of course, at the time, Target had been bought by Virgin, so everyone assumed that Virgin would do the novelization of the TV movie. And I imagined it would be someone like Paul Cornell or Kate Orman, or, you know, one of their big popular writers. So I'm sitting at work one day, I was working for a magazine at the time, and the phone rings, and it's this lovely lady called Rona Selby, who says, hello, is that Gary? I said, yes. She said, I'm Rona from BBC Books. Your name has been recommended to me by someone. As you know, there's going to be a Doctor Who TV movie, and it's been suggested to me that you would be the best person to write the novelization. And I don't know kind of how long the gap was between her finishing speaking and me managing to reply, but it was enough for her to go, are you there? I was like, yeah, yes. And she said, would you like to come in for a meeting? And I was like, yes. Completely thrown by this. It absolutely bamboozled me.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.